An Inman Line ship, the SS City of Boston, was a 305-foot long, 2,213-ton iron hull steamship built and launched on November 15th, 1864. Inside her, she had two steam engines which gave power to her single screw, combined with her sails, allowing her to achieve a speed of 12 knots. In 1865, this gorgeous ship had her maiden voyage, taking her on her first crossing from Queenstown to New York. The city of Boston then began typical commercial service, ferrying passengers across the ocean. In November 1868, the city of Boston rescued the passengers of the ship Wabeno. Back then, if a ship became distressed at sea, the only hope for those on board was that another ship came by. The passengers of the Wabeno were lucky. Their ship had struck an iceberg and was sinking. Though the city of Boston rescued passengers from a doomed ship, those on board her just a few years later would not be so lucky. The city of Boston enjoyed a 6-year career before she would disappear, which seems to have been mostly uneventful, save for a reported incident of her becoming grounded off New York in a winter storm in December of 1868. Though there is some debate among historians about if this event ever actually occurred. On January 28, 1870, the city of Boston left Halifax for Liverpool. On this voyage, she was carrying multiple important and prominent figures of the day, between 191 and 207 total passengers and crew. Some of those on board her included important businessmen and military officers. Being on the ship on this crossing would have been fascinating to see some of these high profile individuals interact, and it makes the unknowns of her loss all the more interesting. Aside from these high profile individuals, there were multiple families with children on board the steamship as well. From what I've been able to find, the ship's captain was a man named William Forbes. She disappeared on this voyage and has never been seen again. The last time the city of Boston and her 191 passengers were sighted was when they left port. 2 days after leaving, a violent gale hit the area. Over the years, there have been multiple proposed theories to explain the loss of the city of Boston. When the ship left, she reportedly was overladen by 18 to 20 inches. If the gale struck the area she was in, bad weather perhaps could have caused her to capsize, or perhaps even an encounter with a rogue wave could explain it. The idea of poor weather sinking the ship is the most likely in my opinion, but there are many other theories out there as well. A collision with an iceberg could also explain the loss of the ship, and if this is the fate that befell her, then talk about some twisted irony. The fact that the very thing she saved passengers of another ship from, no one would come and save her own from. A reported sighting of the ship came on February 28th, when she was possibly sighted off the coast of Ireland, limping along with reportedly broken cylinders in her engines. The validity of this sighting is unknown. Another ship called the Russell reported that they found a wrecked ship sunk 32 miles southwest of the Smalls Lighthouse. Only the funnel of this sunk steamship jetted above the water to announce her presence. But some thought that the wreck was the city of Boston. Between the 16th and 17th of March, it was falsely reported on both sides of the ocean that the city of Boston had arrived safely in port following a tumultuous crossing. People's joy that the ship was safe was very short-lived. The story of her safe arrival in port was quickly corrected. The city of Boston had never arrived, and the ship was still missing. The newspaper even offered a reward for any information that led to the identity of who wrote the hoax story. By the end of March 1870, the Inman Line said that they were confident that the city of Boston was afloat and that she'd eventually come to port safely, even if it was under the power of her sails. But vessels traveling the same route as her reported no traces of the ship as the months passed. Aside from these sightings, multiple proposed messages from the missing ship found their way to shore across the high seas. A piece of wood with the inscription, "City of Boston is sinking, February 11th," washed ashore on April 25th of the year she vanished. A message in a bottle that washed up in Cornwall in 1870 reported that the city of Boston had a collision with another ship and it was sinking. Another message found in a stone bottle at Waterloo on May 6th with the date of February 4th claimed the ship was on fire, sinking, and that her propellers were broken. The city of Boston's propellers had broken in an earlier voyage and had been replaced. Back then, it was not uncommon for steamships to break down, hence why they still had sails. At the time of her loss, her original 3-blade propeller had been replaced with a 2-bladed one. The captain of the City of Brooklyn, another inland line vessel, claimed that he did not believe the new propeller was strong enough to let the City of Boston handle itself in foul weather. And if this was true, then it might have proved fatal. None of these messages we just covered were signed with the names that matched the passenger and crew lists. However, another bottle with a letter in it that was found on Staten Island on April 19th was signed with a name that matched one of the steerage passengers. This message claimed that the city of Boston had caught fire and was swamped as the crew tried to launch the lifeboats. And another message that was found, which was also signed by a name that was on the passenger list, claimed the city of Boston was half full of water at the time of writing. It said that the ship was sinking and that she would be gone in less than 2 hours, and it requested that the writer's son be cared for. The authenticity of these messages is unknown. One other theory even said that a bomb had been placed on the ship to sink it for insurance fraud. While this could make for an interesting film or historical fiction story, it is likely that this didn't actually happen. One other story came out in 1900 that suggested that the city of Boston never sank, but was actually a floating derelict out in the ocean. In 1900, an individual named E. Thompson signed up to be a cabin boy on the vessel J.G. Norward, and 3 weeks after the vessel left Texas, it ran into a severe storm. The whole crew, save Thompson, were washed overboard by a huge wave, but the Norward didn't sink. Thompson, the only survivor, clung on board as the vessel began drifting. Days later, the ship became tangled in seaweed in the Sargasso Sea, which this story makes sound like a graveyard of ships. Thompson said that, among the many vessels drifting silent and abandoned in the Sargasso Sea, was the still floating, but abandoned, city of Boston. Thompson eventually escaped the Sargasso Sea by harnessing the wind and erecting a makeshift sail in one of the Norwood's lifeboats, and he was rescued 3 weeks later. If this account is true, you have to wonder what he would have found on board had he ventured aboard her. Truthfully, no one knows what happened to the city of Boston, and we likely never will. Whatever fate befell her will likely remain a mystery. In my opinion, the most likely scenarios are sinking in bad weather or from striking an iceberg. A fire on the ship is also very possible. If any of those messages we covered were real is unknown, but if one was, then we have an idea of what might have happened to the ship. What do you think happened to the city of Boston? I'd love to know.